Chad again with Ready Overland, and I am going to cover my rear suspension in this video. Most importantly, what really makes a big difference in the way my rig handles, in my opinion, is the rear sway bar and no front sway. So I'm going to walk through how I fit that in along with a long range tank, and it works pretty slick. It fits pretty good. So I'll go through the details of that along with the rear suspension setup that I have. But first, I kind of want to backtrack a little bit and talk about why I even went with 37s in the first place and why I've got my build to where it's at. So this build is over 10 years old. I've been doing this for quite a while, and it's gone through a lot of iterations. I went with the first suspension was just a simple Bilstein, Bilstein lift and 33s, the little clips on the front shock to get you different spring heights, to then switch to an ARB PP51, which I loved that suspension, but I wanted long travel in the rear. So ultimately sold that and went with the Dobinson MRR and built that out, went with 35s on that. And then ultimately I really wanted to build kind of a Rocklander style build where I can hit some much more challenging obstacles and still be able to cruise down the freeway and really kind of go where I want to go with a much more extreme platform. So yeah, can you go a lot of the places that I've gone with 35s or even 33s? Yep, you probably can. And you more likely can. Is it more fun with 37s? Maybe. I just, why not 37? So I really just love the style of the build and the performance I get out of it, and be able to see an obstacle and just hit it and go up without questioning anything really makes a big difference in confidence on the trail. Plus the wider stance gives me more stable. So loving the build at this point with the 37s. Will I go bigger? I said no when I had 35s, but who knows? Likely I'll stick with 37s because it just drives so good at this point. So that's kind of like the big why I have 37s, why I went RCLT. Once again, it's just really for that ability to tackle harder trails and have a extremely durable platform. So my typical trips are maybe 10 days, a long haul, 10, 12 hours to somewhere, Moab or Death Valley or the Rubicon, etc., and be able to hit some really hard trails and ideally not have to fix anything. So I really was focused on durability, reliability, not necessarily a big splash of, extra secondaries up front or some really super high-end shocks that do everything. So but more about reliability. So that's really been the theme on this build along over the years. So I'll get into the rear suspension and most importantly the rear anti-rock. So stay with me here and I'll go through that. Okay, so for rear suspension, before I get too far, I'm going to take the tire off and kind of show you the details of some of the setup here. But this is at full droop. So as you can see, I get pretty good wheel travel with those Dobinson's MRR long travels on the rear. This does stuff all the way up to the fender. So that's what, I don't know, 14 inches or so. But that is twisted. So, the other side is not, is stuffed a little bit in the position that I've had. I got it jacked up on a floor jack here to kind of show to flex it out a little bit. So I'll take the tire off and we'll get into the details of how everything fits together. Okay, so we're going to kind of go through the details here. I'll start in the front here and the lower control arm. So these are homemade rear lower control arms. I used metal cloak bushings, and they, in general, I love the performance of them. They allow flex greater than stock. They're still really cushiony, so they're not like harsh like a true Heim joint, and they're serviceable. You can rebuild them, and you can rebuild the ends and grease them back up. They're kind of a lifetime setup here. So I made them using 1 3/4 by 3/8 wall DOM tubing. These are really lifetime lower control arms. I also made some upper control arms, not quite as beefy as they don't really need it, but using the metal cloak bushings as well. So I'll provide a link to those parts in below as I go into that, through that. The shocks are, like I said, the Davidson MRR long travel rears, so they give a lot more extra flex. The bump stops are simply just the Wheeler's super bumps with the homemade spacer that I made to adapt to the OEM bump stop location, and then spacers to stop the axle in the right location, so I'm not taking out my fenders with these big 37s. Moving a little farther back, the panhard bar is as well the metal cloak panhard bar. I do have the EM Keith riser on the axle, so keeping that as level as it can be with the lift that I have. Rear springs, the Davidsons, I think it's 701s or 703s. I forget the number that's on those. I do have the 735s that I do swap in or out depending on if I have my rooftop tent on, trying to really cut down on weight on everything I do. So hopefully I don't have to put those back in, but trying to keep the weight down. Okay, so to continue on further back, you can see here I've got the AntiRock sway bar. I didn't have to go zigzag. I thought I needed it when I had it positioned farther back, but you can go straight. This is a 14.5-inch center to center on the outer hole here. It's probably 13.5 or so, 13.25 to this smaller hole. And I've run a few different setups on sway bars. I did the no rear sway with the long travel and front sway bars when I had the mid travel setup. And then I ultimately tried out putting the rear sway only, and it makes a huge difference in my opinion, mainly because when you have a front sway bar and no rear sway and long travel, when you go to try to flex the rig, the rear just does all the movement. It just moves everything, and the front never flexes essentially, unless it's in a really harsh setup. So by adding the rear sway, it tries to keep the rear axle level, which then forces the front to articulate. And so it keeps the vehicle much more level, and it makes use of the front suspension, where before the front suspension really was just in straight on hits and compression and on big hits. So adding a rear sway, in my opinion, is a game changer in how these IFS rigs both flex and then handle on the highway. I can go on an on-ramp, I can hit it, I can really push hard on an on-ramp with this rear sway bar, even when I have the rooftop tent on, and it's predictable. It definitely does still tilt around the corners, but it's way more predictable and comfortable hitting those faster corners. So I originally had it located in the back here, just welded onto my bumper actually, but I added the Hellview long range fuel tank, and it interfered with the fuel tank. So there are a couple holes on both sides of the vehicle right here that goes completely through the chassis and is a perfect place to mount your sway bar. it clears the charcoal canister, and there's just clearance all the way through. I'll do a under the vehicle video here as well. But in my opinion, that's kind of a great position to put it. It does require some trimming of the bump stops, a bump stop mount in my experience, but overall fits really good. If you went with a longer arm though, it would really come farther out. I like this 14-inch arm. It's shorter than some of the other arms, like the one on the FJ kit. So a longer arm adds more leverage onto the bar itself, and so it then is a lighter weight sway bar. As you move farther in towards the pivot point, you're going to increase, you don't have as big of a lever arm to try to twist, and so you ultimately have a stronger sway bar feel. So anyway, this is the size that I've got, and it works great. And please comment below if you are interested in a kit. I am kind of thinking about putting together a DIY kit, weld on to the frame to do what you need, and all the parts to put it together. So that's the key on how you fit an AntiRock and long range fuel tank. I do not know if the Long Range America, I think the LRA fuel tanks, I'm not sure they go farther forward over the charcoal canister. If they do, then this probably wouldn't fit, but it definitely fits with the Hellview fuel tanks. So that's all back here. I will go through the fender trimming here in a second, and we'll go from there.
Okay, so under the car here, just wanted to show the clearance that we have and how the AntiRock sway fits through the frame rails and is underneath the fuel canister there. And you can see I have the Hellview tank, once again mentioning that. So it fits plenty of clearance with the Hellview tank. Then you can see how I have the AntiRock link attached down on the bottom of the axle, just simply welded to the axle. And another maybe highlight here is the panhard bar. I have the extended bracket there for that, and once again that is a metal cloak bushings on the ends of that panhard bar. So other than that, that's really about it for rear suspension.
Okay, so on to the rear fender trimming. As you're probably most all aware here, there is the outer plastic one, and then there's the inner steel part of the body. So you have to trim both. And so I took off about 1 3/4 inches on the back as well. And I did that. If you kind of pay close attention to the body, there is a bottom piece of sheet metal, and then there's a top piece of sheet metal, or outer piece of sheet metal. Those two kind of join together into the lip that's originally there from the factory. And so what I did is I drew the line where I wanted to cut. I carefully cut the outer part of the sheet metal, and I bent up the lower part of the sheet metal until it matched, and then I would tack it, and then ultimately welded this whole thing, little tacks along the whole way, and was able to finish it off. And then I raptor lined it just to give it a little more protection. I probably need to do it again here because there's a few chips on it at this point to get cleaned up. So you do have to trim the door as well. So it's all part of the flare here. So you do have to kind of trim delicately both pieces. I don't really like that it creates this big cavity, so maybe I'll 3D print something or somehow figure out to fill that cavity. Other than that, I guess the main thing I cut so much is so I could keep the standard length lower control arms. These are welded both ends. They're not adjustable. Can't extend anything. So, and it fits perfect essentially because the tire sits here and the arc of the control arm only pushes it back as it goes up. And so if it clears kind of at the right height, it's going to clear at stuff. So I do hit ever so slightly on the rear, on on my coastal bumper, but it's pretty minor. It clears pretty good. After this video, I guess we'll see what I go through. Probably go through maybe the bumpers or the interior next. And keep following along as I go through my build. Thanks.